What up, you crazy players and pimp daddies? It's time for episode 152 of the Scottish Liberty Podcast with me, Antony Sammeroff, and that fantastic, angry man,
Pimp Daddy Tam.
Pimp Daddy Tam.
Mac Daddy.
Okay, well, last week we recorded what I thought was a great show. Unfortunately, the sound came out dreadful, so some of you might have quit. Good on content. Some of my settings were all messed up, and I didn't even realize until we uploaded it. And we were talking about how um, libertarians are thought to be stooges of the billionaire class. And I said, you know, one thing I could say is I don't see very many of these billionaires doing anything for the libertarian movement, and I wish they would. Well,
Yeah.
I even said we should stop defending them until they start coming out in favor of libertarians. And yet, today, I find myself moved to make a passionate defense of outsized wealth because my lefty friend sent me this website that if you're on YouTube, you'll actually see this out on the screen. If you're in the podcast, you might actually want to watch this one because there's going to be a little bit of presentation for it on YouTube. And it says wealth shown to scale. This is MKORO Stoff. I'm not reading that website name. They're a bunch of lefty assholes anyway. Why give them a free pass? And I sent this to Tam, and he was incensed by it. What was it that you said? You said something like you would rather the billionaires burn all
Yeah,
their
but when
wealth.
people send me stuff like that about, how all these rich people have got more money than that could choke a jackass, it just makes me defensive. I'm supposed to go, oh yeah, it's terrible. But it just makes me want to go, do you know what? I'd rather see, who's the worst billionaire that you could imagine? I don't know. Who really, let's say it's Bezos, like, 'cause he's going to be the guy anyway. I don't really like Jeff Bezos. He annoys me. But I'd rather see him or just even slowly wipe his ass with all his money in front of people
I don't think he
than
could. I think even if he got $1,000 bills, it would take more than his entire
that would be a far more
lifespan.
interested. That would have been a far more interesting video to make. To show the scale, show Jeff Bezos wiping his ass on $1,000 bills, and show how long it would actually take. Yeah, it's been a month now, and he's not even touched. He's not even scratched the surface.
He
No, I'd
definitely
rather
will have
see them.
scratched the surface, that's for sure. But just not of
I,
his piles of money.
yeah, well, yeah, just other piles. He's a. I would rather see him and all the other billionaires have a big bonfire of all their money, rather than, because if you think about it, see if they did that, see if they actually just had a big pyre and burnt all their money, that would probably be less damaging for the economy than to appropriate that money and redistribute it.
And we're going to find out why today, or at least we're going to
Okay.
examine why.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty clever website. I'm going to give it that. And it
Yeah.
goes wealth shown to scale. And if you're following us
Yeah.
along on YouTube, you'll say
Most
here,
most clever propaganda is very well made,
right,
I have to say.
this tiny point here is $1,000. Then there's a little square, which is $63,179, which is the median US household income. And we won't explore this at any length in this episode, but they never talk about what kind of factors might be, because a lot of the time they talk about wealth stagnation or wage stagnation in the US, but they never really talk about the ways that the government intervenes in the economy to slow
Yeah.
down the growth of wealth for the other person. This block here in green is $1,000,000, and then we have a great big huge rectangle here in turquoise, which is $1 billion. $1 billion, as Dr. Evil Quoth. But that rectangle doesn't go on for long. But then they're like 139 billion, wealth of Jeff Bezos. I'm going to start scrolling right, and as you can see, this will go on for ages. I actually didn't realize that there was another block after this the first time I looked at the website, but it does go on for a long time. And yeah, after a while, you're just like, well, you've made your point. I get it. But Jeff Bezos has got tons and tons of wealth. But what annoys me is they never really make any distinctions, right? I've got a lot of reasons not to like uh, Amazon. One is they're going
Mm,
they're going for handouts everywhere they can, and they get states to compete for where they can put their um, headquarters in exchange
yeah.
for handouts. Okay, I know taxation is theft and all that, but they're not competing on an even playing field, and it could be that something better that Amazon would exist if they were. This says Jeff is so wealthy that it's quite literally unimaginable, and it's right in the sense that it's pretty hard to imagine that, and the words follow around. And last time we mentioned that Jeff Bezos got something like 500 or 600 million from the CIA and NSA, which looked pretty nefarious. And then there's this
Yeah.
headline here that says, who would have guessed that Amazon would benefit from hundreds of millions of other businesses closing down worldwide, many never to reopen? Lockdown increases Bezos' wealth by tens of billions. And the Bezos-owned Washington Post says lockdowns must continue. So he has an elite, but the thing is, they never make,
And probably a lizard as well.
right,
Yeah.
they never seem to make any distinctions between rent seeking, wealth gained by rent seeking, and wealth gained by voluntary trade. And I think that's important. I mean,
Well, it's important to us. Unfortunately, though, would it not be the case that most people who would call themselves on the left or socialists draw no such distinction? For them, all wealth, there's no way. You just don't get rich by being honest. You can't do it, right? You've fucked somebody over along the way in order to gain your wealth.
right.
That's the way they
Well,
look at it.
I think that's true, and it depends like how hard. I mean, they don't think their own wealth is illegitimate, of course. They don't think that the inequality between themselves and someone in Bangladesh is illegitimate. But even so, right? They say things like, say you're not on the very hard left, you're just a sort of progressive-minded
The
fellow.
lazy left. Yeah.
Yeah, lazy left. You might say something like, I just think that Amazon should pay their taxes, right?
Okay.
You'll see that there's no effort in this to see in this big orange block. How much of this would not be owned to Bezos if he really did pay his taxes, right?
Well,
What would
first of all, sorry,
Yeah, I'm
what
not
we
even saying
see,
that
yeah,
taxes are legitimate. Go on.
what we're seeing is 139 billion. Would I be right in saying that's not just big piles of spare cash that Bezos has
Yeah,
got stuck underneath his huge mattress, or buried in a hole, or stuck up his ass? This is most of this stuff will be in stocks,
yeah,
property, land,
yeah.
stuff that's not liquid.
Businesses, yeah, businesses that are actually, it's invested in businesses that
Yeah,
are doing
human
research to make.
capital.
Well, I mean, how's he going to keep the money or grow the money? The only way that he's going to
Yeah,
grow the money is by investing it in businesses that produce things that people want, or at least that would
yeah,
be the case. To the extent that it is a free market, he's going to grow his wealth by investing in businesses that are developing technology that will further the human race according to what their consumer preferences are. To the extent that he's not making money from rent seeking. I want to talk a little bit more about that later. It says, we rarely see
sure.
wealth inequality represented to scale. This is part of the reason Americans constantly underestimate the relative wealth of the super rich. I just want to say, I would like some more distinctions to be made. One is, right, first of all, every 10 pixels you scroll is 5 million,
Mm,
says the thing, and there's quite a lot of 10 pixels. I don't know
yeah.
when we're going to come to the end of this orange block eventually. I've not been scrolling the whole time. I've been a bit stop start with it.
Yeah, but it's
Okay, we're coming
punctuated.
to
Yeah,
the
here we
end
go.
now, it says. And
Yeah,
I'm going to just stop here because I just want to say, right, there's no distinction. One of my distinctions is how much money is gained through voluntary exchange and how much is gained through rent seeking. There's no real way to calculate that because there's no counterfactual where you would see if Amazon wasn't given unfair advantages, that would change consumer preferences. One thing
yeah,
they seem to miss out when they say I wish Amazon would just pay their taxes, is that a lot of that tax money would just be paid by shoppers.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, oh yeah, I forgot to mention before when I was mentioning Bezos rent seeking. The post office in the US has given special subsidies to Amazon so they get their stuff delivered for cheaper, which is kind of unfair because that's coming out the taxpayers' pockets. They also agreed to deliver things on Sunday. Now you could hypothesize that, well, if the post office was a private company and they had a customer that was as lucrative as Amazon, maybe they'd make special exceptions as well. Well, fine. Let private companies
Yeah.
make special exceptions for
Yeah.
Amazon.
Because that's coming out of their profits, and
Exactly.
they would have to adjust their prices accordingly.
Yes, because I don't because I don't think that the post office is efficient. It's probably running at a loss. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to
Yeah.
tax people to fund it. So he is benefiting from the government. But the point is, there's no what I would there's no way to calculate how much of that money would if Amazon did pay their taxes, would be cut off Amazon, and how much would be cut off individuals who are paying for Amazon goods, and a lot of them wouldn't buy the stuff. A lot of the time, you
Mm.
go, am I going to buy that book? Yeah, go on then. But if it was a pound or two cheap, more expensive, you'd go, do you know what? Forget it. I'm not going to buy it. Right? Okay, I'm just not going to
Yeah.
buy it. So there's no counterfactual. But it would be quite nice to see a block of, if we take at face value how much every product bought on Amazon costs versus how much it costs the next cheapest option, the second cheapest option after Amazon. And imagine people had bought all of these goods from the next cheapest option rather than Amazon. How big would the block be of how much Amazon has saved people, actually? How much money has Amazon saved its consumers over what their next best option would be,
Yeah.
right?
How
Let's
much
say
more money? How much more money has it left in their pockets to spend on other things?
that's right.
Um,
Yes,
how
yes.
much? Yeah. How much do Jeff Bezos's employees spend out of their wages on other products that they wouldn't be able to buy if Jeff Bezos wasn't employing them?
This is now the website designers come on saying, "Lol, just kidding. We're only about a third of the way
Yeah.
through. Keep scrolling through. There's more to see." So, um, so and also, what is the counterfactual? So Amazon has saved people money as compared to what they would have spent acquiring more expensive goods if not for Amazon. Now it's saying, let's put the wealth in perspective by comparing to some familiar things. Now, let's see what they've
Yeah.
got
I
for us.
take it's going to come up. Yeah. Here we
Yeah,
go.
here's a small blue block that says all the money you will ever earn in your entire lifetime from the day you were born. Right, 1.7 million. And if we take my point, well, I mean, I'm getting a lot cheaper goods than I would otherwise because I can get them in an Amazon marketplace. Now, I don't deny that something else like Net Market would have existed. Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
here's annual cost if it wasn't for Amazon. But for whatever reason, Amazon got there first, outcompeted its competitors, and then it got the best UX experts in the world to keep the site user friendly. And
Outcompeted or possibly outlawed.
yes, we don't know. Maybe they did. Maybe they did outlobby the other companies. There's no
Yeah.
way of telling. Here's an annual pay of an Amazon warehouse worker, which, by the way, I should add is a lot better than zero pay.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Which is what they would be getting if they weren't working for Amazon. But the thing is, I'm making these distinctions, right? But what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that they're the end of the debate. Like you said, either they outcompeted or they outlobbied. But the thing is, the left don't make these distinctions. So that's why we
Mm-hmm.
have to, right? Here's annual cost to a house of every single homeless veteran, right? Well, Suddenly the left care about homeless,
About
about
yeah, they
soldiers,
care
right?
about ex-soldiers. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my view is
Yeah,
you made the choice. You know,
yeah, yeah.
you
Fuck.
made
Yeah, years it would be fuck those baby killers, man.
right, right. Annual cost of chemotherapy for all cancer patients, 9 billion. Okay, and it's just showing that this is a blue rectangle here. In 2018, Jeff Bezos made 9 billion in about 4 days. Well, I mean, that's the point. How much, see, how many products did he have to sell to make 9 billion? How many people did he serve? I mean, did he slit a grandmother's throat? She must have been a bloody rich auntie with 9 billion. What did he do to acquire it, right? And I'm saying if it was acquired illegitimately, that's a different story. Even if the fortunes of very rich people are dwarfed by the incomprehensible wealth of the 0.0001%. I've got a point on that actually. I really hate when they're showing some econometrics and they split the population into 5 quintiles, like the bottom 20%, the second, because it's so obvious that the top 1% are should have a quintile of their own because their income compared to the rest of the 19% of the richest people, it's not very it lacks clarifying power. That's one thing that I
Okay,
will definitely say.
can we just have a look? Here's one here: the wealth of Beyonce, right? So that's
400
estimated to
million
be
dollars.
$400 million. Now,
Yeah,
in my opinion, right, if there's anybody who less deserves $400 million, it's Beyonce, because her music's utter, utter shite, right? Okay, but that's just my opinion. Clearly, millions of people disagreed, and her music brings pleasure and fulfillment clearly to a lot of people, right? So she sells that amount of albums and does that amount of tours, whatever, and she makes that amount of money. But it's interesting, I find, when people talk about wealth and how disgusting it is and how obscene it is, they tend to talk about CEOs of companies and fat cats.
right.
They tend not to talk about football players.
Well, they do talk about, I've heard quite a lot of people go for football players, but not so much like singers and entertainers.
Yeah, but they're not at the top of the list, though. It's
Okay.
always CEOs and heads, because to most people they look as if they're they don't do anything, and maybe a lot of them don't. Maybe they're just professional scapegoats. But
So,
I don't hear the same amount, the same venom, right? Yeah, people go, oh, it's ridiculous, but they don't stop going to football,
that's true.
right? They don't say, do you know what? I'm not buying a season ticket for Manchester United this year because I'm not. I refuse to take part in this. They continue to do that. So there's a lot of double standard and hypocrisy when people talk about wealth unimaginable. I mean, the $400 million is not to be sneezed at either. I mean, if
Yeah,
you really want to get down to it, I'd if all you were doing was buying necessities, you'd struggle to spend $100 million, I think, in your lifetime. So
sure. Well,
yeah,
the thing is, speaking of CEOs, the next goes wealth of Apple CEO Tim Cook, 625 million. Okay, so
yeah,
but the thing is, CEOs are in a different league. I've defended CEO pay in the show before. One thing is they
yeah.
only tend to get those big salaries for about 5 years, and then they bring someone younger in. But also, I mean, it's the market. It's like they're the reason why CEOs get paid to something maybe like 200-300 million. Um, it's because they're being bid for by all the companies that they could possibly go for at their skill level. If there was like 1,000 times as many CEOs as there are, then they'd get less pay. If there was 1,000 times as many people who are as skilled as they are, then they would get paid less. Obviously, because
Okay,
why would someone want to pay them 300 million where that guy will do the same job for
yeah,
250 or 225 or 200 or 100? But the
okay,
whole world would actually benefit for having people that competent. And I don't think people understand that they're making decisions that affect literally millions of people. And if they make bad decisions, the company they're the CEO of could potentially go bankrupt, right? It's their job to make that whole company more successful. So it's reasonable that
Yeah.
they get paid the market rate. Now, someone
Well,
could make
I I
go on.
think there's an argument. I think there's several arguments to be made against that, and I'm not convinced that CEOs, in many instances, are worth their money. But it's
Okay,
not
tell me
germane
about.
to what we're. It's not
Well, I
germane
mean,
to what
well,
we're talking
let's have a.
about today.
Well, I don't mind covering it if you if you
No, no,
if.
because there's a lot to cover just in this, so I think
Okay,
we'll
well,
save
if
that
there's
one.
time, we'll save it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I look forward to being corrected on that. So I can see a better argument for why, say, Jeff Bezos or the owner of some of these services like Google, Facebook, and what have you. I can see a better argument for why they didn't, in inverted commas, deserve it, because I think these are sectors which are naturally tend towards monopolistic, and it's like a power node in one of these games where you collect resources, right?
Yeah.
It's like whoever gets the power node first gets to profit from it. But the thing is, this seems to assume that you can just move the wealth away from them without all sorts of consequences that we're going
Right.
to cover shortly. So here's lifetime earnings of a doctor, lifetime earnings of a lawyer, lifetime earnings of a hedge fund manager, and they're smaller squares. It's pretty, and it says these people see themselves as fabulously rich, but obviously compared to Jeff Bezos, they're not. And it says, and often oppose policies aimed at reducing inequality. There's that big word, inequality again, that meaningless
Hmm.
word since in South
Yeah.
Africa when millions of people came out of poverty. Inequality, unsurprisingly, went up because taking people out of poverty meant there was a whole class of people that were more rich, but, but no one got more poor. It's just, it looks bad on inequality. But
Yeah.
many have not fully grasped the enormous gulf between themselves and the super rich. That's true. I mean, I think this does bear scrutiny. I mean, at least it doesn't, not scrutiny, it bears distinguishing between. Like, I want to, we shouldn't have these stats which lump the top 20% of earners or even the top 1% of earners together because it lacks clarifying power um,
Yeah.
for our thinking. So here's Mark Zuckerberg. I don't know why it's saying that. Oh yeah, so you could go. I don't know why we want to. I don't really
Well, don't.
understand the point that that
Um,
line's
just like,
making.
well, so Mark Zuckerberg, what, 82 billion? That's not.
We can have a world in which wealthy people exist without handing nearly all money to the super rich. Well, I mean, it's like, first of all, it wasn't handed; it was trade exchanged for, and to a
Yeah.
large degree, maybe. Um, but
Well, again, it's we.
yeah,
You
it's
know,
we.
who's
It's
we?
yeah,
If you do not wish to buy Jeff Bezos's products, you don't. Well, it's
yeah,
not
yeah.
even
You can.
products. It's goods and services. You don't have to.
Yeah, yeah, you can go on on eBay, or you can deliberately look for other sites. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and no single human needs or deserves this much wealth. Well,
Who
again, here,
decides that?
yeah, exactly. You don't need dessert, and you certainly don't fucking deserve dessert. So put the ice
Yeah.
cream down, Tubby.
Yeah.
So someone can come in. No one needs it. Deserve is a meaningless word. I mean, how can you calculate who deserves what, right? The
Mm.
question is, are they A, maybe entitled to it, or I don't even know if that's the right word. You say who's entitled to what? Are they did they acquire it legitimately? Are so that's the end of the Jeff Bezos block, and I didn't even actually realize that there was text on that there was more to come. So, do you want to say anything more about Jeff Bezos before we go on to the second part of the site?
No, no. They just keep ticking along.
I just want to say.
Um,
So the thing is, when people talk about this deserve right, it's like the question is, what action exactly are you saying should be taken towards what ends? Because a lot of the time, right, people are saying, well, we should redistribute the wealth to help the impoverished people, right? Whether, or let's say for the sake of argument, as many people who are free market orientated are, they'll say, well, see, if you redistribute wealth, you will see a knock-on reduction in growth, right?
Yeah,
And some people on the left will argue against that, or some people will say, well, who cares about growth, even though growth is strongly correlated with rising incomes from people at the bottom of the economic ladder, right?
yeah,
Let's take for granted, for the sake of argument, that there's a trade-off between inequality and growth. If you reduce inequality, you'll also reduce growth. Let's say, for the sake of argument. Now, which one of those two things you should pursue is a value judgment, in a sense, because someone will say, well, I don't mind if the pie is smaller, just so long as the people at the bottom is taken care of. That is a value judgment. But what policies will achieve your values is a matter for economic science. It's
mm,
not a subjective matter, right? So you can say, I want people on low incomes to have higher incomes, therefore I support the minimum wage.
yeah.
Well, you wanting people in the bottom to have higher incomes, that as a goal to pursue, that's a value judgment. But whether the minimum wage will achieve that goal or not is not a value judgment. That's a matter for economic science. And that's
Yeah.
the preamble that I want to give to this next section.
And also whether or not that higher income will result in a higher standard of living.
Yeah,
It may not.
that's a great point, as I anticipate you saying, because yeah, if companies have to pay everyone a higher wage, maybe the price of all the goods and services will come up. So even though you're earning a higher wage, your purchasing power is
Yeah,
lower, because there's an accumulating effect of the minimum wage, which I often don't see on articles arguing against the minimum wage, which is, it's not just the person in the shop, it's the person that drove the goods to the shop, it's blah blah. Along the supply chain, there might be 4 or 5 people who receive a minimum wage rise. Therefore, a 20% rise in the minimum wage may actually result in a more than 20% rise in the costs of
mm.
goods and services. And that's a very important point. Thank you to
Yeah, but you don't
Henry.
have to put your prices up. Just pay your shareholders less.
Should we examine that? I mean, I think there's a point.
Well,
that
considering they just assume that all the shareholders are just these greedy fat cats. And
well,
when you look at the shareholders in something like McDonald's, many of the people who are shareholders in McDonald's aren't individuals. They are people like J.P. Morgan, Chase
right.
Manhattan, and even governments
Well,
have their pension
yeah,
funds
yeah,
invested in some of these companies.
and not
And if
just
you pay them less, that means pensions
right.
don't
Yeah,
pay off.
yeah, and it's not just the government; it's the
Yeah,
private pension companies are obviously investing in the
yeah,
stock market as well. So it's basically, yeah, it's taking money away from granny. So, but
yeah,
the other interesting thing is, on that point, entrepreneurs don't really actually have a choice over whether to give that to over whether to pass those extra costs on to consumers, or whether to cut the amount of money they spend on facilities for staff, or whether to cut dividends to shareholders. I mean, they might have some choice, but largely it's down to the market. They can't just decide arbitrarily. It's the same as your wage. Like, it's
yeah,
arrived at by consensus on the market. You
yeah,
get paid roughly what your skills will yield. So
yeah.
it's not that. Anyway, it says here.
Well, I mean, the case in point, as a shareholder, you could say, well, this is not paying dividends. I'll just cash in my shares
Yeah, and
and
invest
that'll
in
be my
something else.
dividend.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So this now go on to say, um, Jeff Bezos may be insanely rich, but this is a drop in the ocean compared to the combined wealth of his peers. And here's the wealth of the 400 richest Americans who own about $3 trillion, right? Which is more than the bottom 60% of Americans, right? Um, Now, $3 trillion, it sounds like a lot, but here's 400
Well,
people,
it is a
right?
lot. Yeah.
It is a lot, but I mean, what is the US government debt?
Oh, well, yeah,
Just
there's
the,
the debt and then there's the deficit, but the
yeah,
debt is in
exactly.
the trillions.
I think,
It's
yeah,
and rising.
maybe we should just do a quick Google. US debt for those people listening. Uh, Outstanding debt owned by the federal government as of September 2019 was 22.7 trillion. Well, it'll be a lot more than that now. How much are the
Yeah.
unfunded liabilities? For 45.8 trillion. So I'm not saying that
Yeah.
3
And
trillion
that's not
isn't
even including the deficit. How
right.
much, yeah,
So
how
that's
much
going to
each
grow
year.
every year. So
Yeah.
put it this way, if you appropriated their trillions, you wouldn't even pay off
No.
10% of what the American government owes. So, but how is it relevant? How's that relevant, Anthony? Well, how it's relevant is it's actually the investment of these 3 trillion in businesses and industries that are creating the wealth. Um, so it says $1 trillion is such a large figure that you might as well say 11 gajillion zillion dollars. I mean, that does sound quite funny. You might as well say that. Hey, Tam, you might as well say 11 gajillion zillion dollars.
11 gajillion zillion dollars. Wow. Yeah.
Wow, you gads. So, in this section, we will try and understand the scale of this figure by looking at what could be accomplished with various chunks of this wealth.
Here we go.
As we
Yeah.
proceed, try and keep in mind all of this wealth is controlled by a group so small that they could fit on a single 747 airplane with 260 seats left over. I wouldn't even say they control it. They might allocate it. Here's the plane. It's so patronizing. So fucking patronizing. Right. Oh, I was enjoying that plane. Why did they make it go away? What could we do with 3% of this money? Who is this we? Who
Yeah.
is this collectivist we? I hate it when they say we. Test every
Yeah. So
American
do
for
I.
coronavirus. Right. And I just want to add, I'm probably going to have to say this over and over again, but I'll just say it once to get the point across, right? As though you could test every American every American with 3% of this wealth, because it's not like if you went out and tried to buy 300 million kits, the price of those test kits would stay exactly the same. No, those companies would have to go out and like appropriate machines and factories and change them from producing whatever they're currently producing to producing corona test kits. So the price of the test kits would go up through the roof, and it would end up costing, I don't know, 10 times as much, 5 times as much,
Yeah.
several times as much. And also, you wouldn't be getting all that other production of the other stuff that those factories and machines are currently making. So, Lord knows something else would be more expensive in the shops. But that doesn't even enter the mind of these
Mm-hmm.
economically illiterate people
Yeah.
who just,
What I'd like to see is something like this with a tiny little square with what Jeff Bezos and the rest of the super millionaires actually own in terms of assets compared to this massive big thing of all the debt that the governments of the
oh
world
yeah, that's a good one. That's
are in, and
that's a
the
good one.
money that they have pissed up against the wall on
Yeah, that's a good
stupid
point.
ideas and wars that result, at least Jeff Bezos, he enriches himself, he enriches his shareholders, he also arguably enriches his customers. Whereas government programs not only haven't yielded dividends, but they've actually resulted in more debt, more waste, and more destruction.
Right.
So, yeah, I'd like to see that.
this is like 3% to 3%, the same amount to permanently eradicate malaria, right? Okay, so why doesn't someone come up with a proposal? Because I don't believe this, right? Frankly think if you try to do this, for the same reason, it would cost a lot more than it's stated. But come
Well,
up with a proposal that how much it would be to permanently eradicate malaria, and
okay,
go to the papers and
a
create a
word.
massive big appeal
Yeah,
for
yeah, yeah,
these people to cough up. And if they
yeah,
don't, create a massive outrage and go, are you guys fucking kidding us? Are you fucking kidding us? We gave you this proposal that just for 3% of your wealth
yeah,
we would eradicate malaria, and
yeah,
you're not pushing the button on it. That's
yeah,
because in ancient Greece, I think 25% in Athens, 25% was of people were independently wealthy. And what it is they had a cultural norm where if you were independently wealthy, you were basically expected to provide funds for the theaters and all of the sort of things to culture people, and yeah, and
yeah.
people did it,
Didn't they
and
have an
people did.
annual competition to see who could be the benefactor?
I don't know the specific details of that,
Yeah, I
but it
think
could
they
be
did.
true. So, right, okay. So the thing is, a lot of people are doing stuff for malaria. I don't know if Bill Gates is one of
Okay,
them.
well, I need to say something about malaria right away.
Okay.
I grew up in Africa. Now, one of the problems, at least with malaria, is see, malaria was under control in Africa. When I was a kid in Zambia, there was no malaria outside, inside of, like the only places that had malaria were places right out in the bush, right out in the sticks, game reserves, things like that. In towns and cities, malaria was eradicated. And the reason it was eradicated was DDT.
All
Right,
right. Yeah.
the governments regularly use DDT. It's a controversial substance, and basically, but it was a highly effective
Yeah.
substance for eradicating malaria larvae. Now that DDT is banned universally, worldwide, so in other words, we in the West banned Africans from using DDT. It was relatively cheap to use as well,
Yeah.
obviously. Now in Nairobi, okay, in a modern Western city like Nairobi, you can get malaria in the fucking Hilton Hotel.
Right.
That's how out of control malaria is in Africa, and it's way worse now than some would argue than it's ever been, and that's largely down to the prohibition of DDT.
Right.
Now,
Right.
there's an argument to be had about whether or not DDT should be used, but the people
Yeah.
who and the environmentalists who wanted the end to DDT won't listen to the argument.
Sure.
And when they were told at the time, do you realize, and many of these people were on the left, many of these people are still would agree. And you say, well, you want to ban DDT, you want people to die, right?
Right.
Because that's exactly
Yeah.
what will
Exactly.
happen, and that's exactly
And
what did happen.
I reckon
Yeah,
that DDT is probably somewhat toxic because
it is.
all animals have the same central nervous system,
Yeah,
right? There's been no innovation there. So if it's toxic to a mosquito, it's going to be toxic to a human being. But guess what?
yeah,
It's better to be toxified than dead. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? There's
yeah.
no fucking utopia on Earth, right? You're getting toxified um, to a degree with most of the food you eat because
Alcohol's a toxin.
yeah, exactly. And the body only has so much capacity to
Yeah,
remove heavy metals and all sorts of things. So we accumulate this shit and it does damage our health, but compared to what? We're
yeah,
still living longer than ever before, even though we've got more plastic and heavy metal toxins in our food supply. So So here you go. For 5% of this wealth, you could provide $1,200 for every household. Oh, so you admit that a universal basic income would only last 20 months, for 20 months, even if you
Yeah.
appropriated the wealth of the 400 richest Americans. Okay,
Well, here's the
what are they
deal.
going to do with the $12,000? Sorry, twelve hundred
1,200.
dollars. Are they just going to go out to the shops and they're
Well,
going to
twelve
go out?
hundred dollars ain't a lot of money, but it's a lot of money if you don't have it, right?
Exactly.
So,
So why do you want to
but
give it to every American household? Why don't you just give it to the people that
they're the
want them?
people who need it. They could maybe get $3,000 or $4,000.
But they're just going to
But
go out to
okay,
the, sorry, before you go on, they're just going to go
yeah,
out to Walmart and spend it on Amazon, and it's going to go straight back to Jeff Bezos and the Walmart.
probably, yeah. But I guarantee you, if you gave every household in America $1 million, I promise you, in 1 year's time, you will still see poverty. You will
Yeah,
still have
because
poor
yeah,
people
yeah. This is what
because there are some people who will misspend that money and still have nothing to show
and it's
of any value really at the end of it.
it's always the same people who as well. It's always the same people as well. It's
Yeah,
like a lot of people are poor because they don't have economic skills. So giving them
yeah,
money isn't going to make them economically skillful. And I
no,
argued in my book, Universal Basic Income, for and against, get a copy of Amazon and
yeah,
enrich Jeff Bezos.
yeah,
Uh, get a copy of Amazon. I argued in that in the end, basically that unless you're helping those people at the bottom of the economic ladder, one, get skills so that they can command a higher wage, or two, um, gain capital, as in get invested in the stock market or property
yeah,
or whatever it is, so that they get dividends, you can do all the redistribution you want. It's still going to go back to the rich people. So
yeah,
these lefties, they just seem completely adverse to the idea of a job as a means out of poverty, or a well-paid job as a means to reduce inequality.
yeah,
They just hate the wealth. They just hate the concentration of wealth. Well, do you know what?
yeah,
I don't think it's really that good for people to be dependent on the government. I don't think it's good for their self-esteem, and I don't think it's going to make them feel secure, because they know at any time a handout can be taken away. But see, like, do you know what? Before I was a therapist, I taught the piano, right? If for whatever reason I wasn't allowed to practice psychotherapy anymore, I can go back to teaching piano, right? If I couldn't do that, I'm pretty sure I've learned quite a lot of different skills, so I'm pretty sure I could learn something else that I could get a decent wage for. So
yeah,
that puts me at a much better position in terms of my internal sense of security, because I think
yeah,
that I'm competent enough to go out and make work happen. And I wasn't
yeah,
always confident of that. And do you know what? I didn't earn a lot of money because I wasn't confident in myself and didn't have a good money making mindset. It
yeah.
took me quite a long time. So this is a mindset thing for people. I
Sure.
definitely believe that. You know,
Yeah.
there um
I mean,
uh,
in most of in a lot of instances, to say, okay, this person's is poor, right? And they're not, they don't make very good decisions in their
yeah.
with their money. What can we do? We'll give them more money. It's a bit like saying, well, we've got this guy and he's addicted to marijuana. What can we do to improve his life? Well, let's give him crack cocaine as
Right,
well
right, right. Yeah, I mean a lot
and see
well,
how he gets on with that.
in the case of people with addictions, giving them a handout is making their life worse, not better. And as I
Yeah,
pointedly point out, may well be making their death worse rather than better. This says the recent coronavirus stimulus uh, was the largest ever passed by Congress. It was financed entirely through deficit spending, which will be repaid by taxpayers for
yeah.
generation. The burden of
Well, we
repaying
agree
this
in that.
debt could be erased in an instant with a tax on the super rich so small they will not even feel it. Yeah, I'm sure it could be done in an instant and it would have no knock on effects. But one of the things is, right, see, when it comes to tax on right, see if I've got this project, right, say it's a chemical plant, and their chemical plant, could cost something like 300 million, right? So without someone who's got a few billion, or people putting their heads together, you're not going to get one of those, right? Our aim is to make a profit. Now, see if I'm going to get taxed, let's say for the sake of argument, 25% of that. I might roll the dice on it because I don't know if it's going to make a profit. But supposing I can anticipate a huge tax on it, let's just say 75% for the sake of argument, I'm much less open to taking the risk of blowing 300 billion or 300 million or whatever on the initial investment, because yeah, obviously I'm less likely to get to even if I do succeed, I'm less likely to see the return. So, but the thing is that this is presuming once you have that chemical plant there, if it makes stuff cheaper than the current infrastructure, and that's how it becomes successful, you're
Yeah.
making everyone's life better because they get cheaper products, which means their paycheck is actually worth more in real terms.
Yeah.
The wealth of
Also,
400, I'm kind of actually for Amazon paying for a large share of the stimulus bill, since they seem to be profiting from the lockdown, since all the
okay,
shops
but
shops
let's
are
wind back here a little bit,
right.
right? Okay, two things. We've already explained that most of Jeff Bezos's wealth will be locked up in land,
Investments. Yeah,
property, investments, right? So in order for it to transfer that into liquidity,
that's a good
either
point.
you would
Yeah.
need to transfer those things into government ownership, or you would need to sell them off. So
Mhm.
somebody else would need to be coming in
Yeah,
and be
yeah,
prepared to buy them, right? So they have
yes.
to pay that amount of money to Jeff, or do you know what I
Base.
mean, for
Yeah,
to buy those
yeah.
products, so that you could then open it up.
Why would they
But
do
even
that?
let's supposing you were just going to tax Jeff Bezos and the 400 richest Americans on their profits. All they will do is offset that back again to the products and the services that they produce. They will simply raise the price of those products and services so that you, the taxpayer, will end up paying Jeff Bezos's tax bill for him.
Yeah, yes. So, and I think you kind of touched on a point there, which is, see if you force Jeff Bezos to sell off his assets and
Yeah,
someone else has to come along and buy them. Why would anyone want to buy those assets? They'd be like, I don't think so, because next thing the government's going to point their gun
yeah,
at me and say that I have to sell them
yeah,
off so that I can
yeah,
pay for the bailout too. It's
yeah,
like, it's this puerile, immature thinking which thinks that the economy is like a chessboard where you can move one piece without it actually affecting all.
yeah,
It's not, you can't just move one piece in an economy, right?
yeah.
The wealth of the
I mean, they would
400.
advocate the government should just come in, basically steal Jeff Bezos's assets,
Right.
freeze them and say, okay, we're taking over all these assets that you have in order to pay off this debt. But if the government did that, just like Zimbabwe, just like Venezuela, just like a countless amount of other countries that done it, suddenly those assets wouldn't be worth a
No.
fraction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Partly because they're all getting liquidated at once, but partly because there's regime uncertainty, it's called in economics, which is,
yeah,
what am I going to invest in? What am I going to do? Why would I want to do anything? Because I don't know what's around the corner. So it says the wealth of 400 Americans could have financed the entire CARES Act, including the corporate bailouts, expanded unemployment, and expanded testing, with nearly $1 trillion left over. Again, you assume that ceteris paribus, that liquidating $2 trillion, 2/3 of their assets, would actually yield 2 trillion. It wouldn't. It would yield, maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if it only yielded 20% of that if
yeah,
you tried to liquidate it all at once. Instead, the American taxpayer will be stuck with the bill. Yes, quite right, quite right. Well said. Instead, if you did this, instead the American taxpayer will be footed by the bill. And by the way, I just want to mention, in America, It's only the top 40% of taxpayers that are paying any taxes uh, in net. So when you say the American
Yeah,
taxpayers, these 400 richest Americans, despite dodging tons of taxes, are actually paying the vast majority of taxes.
yeah, and
Five
so are their employees.
5.7% lift every American out of poverty. Now, I don't mean to sound incompassionate and all that, but poverty in America, for the main part, includes owning a car and a
Yeah.
fridge and and all
Well,
that
hang on
stuff.
a second though. Here's the thing: lift out of poverty. Okay, first of all, you have to define what poverty is. And if it's a moving goalpost, i.e., well, there's people in Bangladesh and they're in poverty, but there's people in America, they're in poverty because they're in relative poverty.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
if you lifted them out of that poverty, they would simply redefine what poverty is again, right? So it will come like, well, if you only have a 2-bedroom house, you're in poverty.
Right.
You know,
Yeah,
then we'll
exactly.
lift them up again. So everybody's got a 3-bedroom house. Well, the guy with the 4-bedroom house is rich, and the 3-bedroom house people, they're in poverty. And if you think that's ridiculous, well, it's no more ridiculous than what they're actually doing at the moment when they tell you that people in the West are in poverty.
Right. Well,
They're
I'd like to hear our previous guest, Darren McGarvey's response, who wrote Poverty Safari's response to that. I think. No, I mean, I seriously would like to hear us, but because, but I
what do you
would.
suppose his rebuttal would be?
We'll find out when he agrees to come
Okay,
back on the show.
okay,
Um, One thing I would like to say is because I wasn't wise to this. I do actually agree, of course. Well, not of course, that poverty has to be to some degree a relative measure, just because the fact that, say, like 100 years ago, if you didn't have electricity, you
yeah.
wouldn't you wouldn't be considered in poverty. But
But why are they
today,
not in relative? Why are they in relative poverty and not in relative wealth?
that's a good point. We could have the relative. They are. Because right now, yeah, if you don't have a refrigerator or you can't
Yeah,
afford a refrigerator, you're in poverty. But that wouldn't be the case 50 years ago. So
no,
to some degree, it has to be a relative measure. But the way that they calculate relative poverty is to make it absolutely meaningless. Because when
yeah,
you use their calculations of relative poverty, they do it in such a way that poverty could never actually be abolished,
no.
which is not helpful. Even from a left wing perspective, it's not helpful because, sorry, a fly genuinely flew right into my mouth then. I feel impoverished and compared to people who don't have flies flying into their mouth. As of 2019, around 38 million Americans lived in poverty. Again, I want to know what this poverty is. If Americans in poverty were a state, they would be the second largest by population. I get really cagey when people say this stuff because if this was true, why would people want to come from all over the world to come to America? I've heard people say like
Yeah,
inequality is the worst. Like Britain and America have two of the worst societies in terms of poverty. And I'm like, really? Seriously? Why are you saying that? I mean, I know you're a lefty and I actually believe that you're well intentioned and you just want poor people to have good things, but can you not at least make an argument that isn't susceptible to so easily being punctured? I mean, it's really not helping anyone. Like you need clear data.
yeah.
Americans
I have no
living
idea. I have no idea what this person making this graph actually means by poverty.
Exactly. Every single person in America could be lifted above the poverty line. Well, I mean, as we said, they just change it with a
Yeah.
one-time cash subsidy of around $10,000 per impoverished family and around 7,000 for impoverished individuals. The total cost would be 170 billion, a little over 5% of the wealth controlled by the
These
400.
people
Are
have
you
no
so
idea how
gullible? So
economics work.
gullible. So gullible. Yeah, I'm sure they'll stop at that. Oh, you gave us $10,000, right? We're happy now for the rest of eternity.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm fucking sure. They'll go out, a lot of them will go out and spend all the money pretty quickly. They might even go out on holiday, on a long holiday, or go gamble it away. Some of them definitely will.
yeah.
It may seem counterintuitive that a one-time subsidy could have any lasting impact on chronic poverty, but one of the surprising truths about poverty is that it's fluid. Yes, I agree. Thank you. And one of the ways out of poverty, that fluidity, used to be called a job. Americans move in and out of poverty many times throughout their lives, and one good year can have a massive and long-lasting effect. I love this data point, right? A wealth of data now supports the idea that one-time cash transfers can permanently transform a local economy. Given a sudden windfall, people invest in their future. They go back to school, obtain transportation, pay for childcare, pay down debilitating debts, and do any number of things to improve their career, right? See, when they say that if a lot of people who move out of poverty stay out of poverty, I think the really important qualifying factor is they moved out of poverty. In other words, they went and changed their habits or got a job or got some skills that moved them out of poverty. That's very different from being given a handout which doesn't increase your skills or earning power. When they say this one-time cash transfers can permanently
Yeah,
transform a local economy, what they're not looking at is the people who had to pay for the
yeah,
one-time transfers and how it affected their community,
yeah,
right? That's one point. The second point is, if you're told that this is a one-time cash transfer, you're much more likely to make a sensible decision with it. Whereas in this kind of nebulous world where he's creating, where not only will there never be a someone who's got more than $1 billion anymore, but will never allow it to happen again, investment investment patterns will change,
yeah,
and people will be basically expecting that this is a gravy train. It's not going to be a one-time
yeah.
cash transfer
I mean,
because,
you look even look at something simple like a lottery, right? So each of us all puts in $5 into the lottery, and we draw the balls out the machine at the end of it all, and one person wins, you know, $1 billion. So without a shadow of a doubt, that $1 billion is going to make a hell of a difference to them and their local economy and people round about them. However, everybody else is $5 out of pocket.
yeah, that's it. And you don't know
That's
what
just a
they would have
simple fact.
spent money on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
precisely.
And just the same, you don't know to fund those $10,000 handouts, you don't see all the factories and machines and technology that wasn't invested in. The
Yeah,
innovations, that might have been the person that invented the next smartphone or, but that won't get funded. That won't get funded if you
yeah.
redistribute the wealth. In the
Or the
US,
guy who was just about to start a new business, a new factory in his town, and the government came in and handed him with a massive tax bill. So now he doesn't have that money to invest in his new business anymore. So it doesn't go ahead.
in the US, for all of the people that escape poverty in any given year, about half stay out of poverty for at least 5 years afterwards. I just come to my previous point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's because they escape poverty through getting a job or getting some skills, right? Not because they got a
So that, but
handout.
yeah. So then, but that still admits that 2/3 of those people are still in poverty.
Right. So this is a very unskillful way to solve the problem. And I go back to the best way to solve the problem would be to have voluntary organizations, because they'd have to be very careful with who they gave handouts to, and they'd
Yeah,
probably demand that they probably put people through training programs or give
yeah.
them internships, and they'd say, well, I
And
know you can't.
sometimes it wouldn't be handouts; it would be credit-free loans, interest-free loans.
Yeah, or they'd say, look, I know you can't afford to take this internship on your own. So if you apply it and you get the internship, we will pay you. We will pay you the
Yeah,
minimum as long as you
but we
complete the
suggest you
internship.
take this job as
Yeah,
well
yeah,
in order to pay some of the costs yourself. If you
yeah.
can hold down the job, we're willing to
And
pay
and
X
that
amount.
And that cannot be centrally planned because it
No.
requires local knowledge. That's why
Yeah.
they have to be charities and local institutions, volunteering institutions,
Yeah.
because there's no way that the government has the information to tailor help to millions of people.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
that's
it doesn't
quite,
have to be charities. It could be mutual aid
yeah. And they,
organizations. You know.
yeah, I'm all for all sorts of organizations to
Yeah.
try and solve these problems. It says
Yeah.
this would not be a permanent fix for all Americans, I'll say. Surely some would quickly return to poverty and others face debt so large that the subsidy would make little difference. But for tens of millions of Americans, this would be a life-changing event. It would be a generation-defining social program. Yeah, because despite the trillions, I think it's 15 trillion America has spent on the American government has spent 15 trillion, it's probably more than that now, on the war on
Mm.
poverty. And guess what? There's still poverty in America. That's
Yeah.
how good they are at solving poverty. For 15 trillion, there shouldn't be anyone left in poverty in America if this was a skillful program. What could we do with
What could we
6%?
do?
We,
Who
who's
the
this
fuck are
we?
we?
Refund all 2018 taxes for all households earning under 80 grand. It's just random shit. Do you know what I mean? In
Yeah.
2018, the combined federal tax revenue among all households earning $80,000 a year was around 200 billion. This money was taken up entirely from poor and middle class Americans. Well, do you know what?
Yeah. Well, don't
Yeah, well, don't tax them then.
stop taking it from them. Yeah.
I am kind of, I think I've come around to being for the position that like the income tax should only actually be on 1% of the 1% highest earners if it's to exist at all. Just simply,
Well, only if it's voluntary.
well, I mean, the principal position is taxation is theft, but I'm saying if we're going to
Yeah.
have an income tax at all, what could
Well,
we
it
do?
was. I mean, what that was the initial a case in America that income tax only did apply to that
Yeah, exactly.
part
So
of the population, and even then,
it's the thin
it
end of
had
the wedge,
it had to be apportioned.
right?
You couldn't just say we're taking this money from you, and that's constitutional. That's in the Bill of Rights. That's in the Constitution. That the money must be apportioned, i.e., ring fenced. You go,
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
taking this money for you,
For
and it's for
this
this.
specific purpose.
Yeah,
So one of the things here is like, again, it's the same stuff. 8% of this money would provide clean drinking water and toilet access to every human on Earth. And by the way, I disagree with this for the same reason as before. Once you start spending that money on those things, the price of acquiring those services will go through the roof, and obviously you have to liquidate the assets. But also, let's take the point of this, right? People are currently developing environmentally friendly toilets for Africa. I've seen them before. You know, they compost it and whatnot, right? Supposing you give this massive handout to whatever the current organizations,
boondoggle is. Yeah,
yeah, whatever the current favored corporation that you're going to give a massive handout to provide all these toilets, you're basically for short-term gain, you're going to destroy all the innovation that is currently underway, which is going to be adopted in a piecemeal fashion. And you might go, well, you know, who cares about the innovation? We just need to get those Africans clean drinking water and toilets. Well, do you know what? That's billions of future billions of people. If you might think you're saving people in the short term, but in the long term, and the long term is a very long time. I don't know how long time is going to run for, but it seemed to run pretty long so far. Actually, this is seen and unseen again, isn't it?
yeah.
Around 844 million people have no access to clean drinking water of any kind. And I wonder how many of these people actually have done any volunteering for anything in their life. You know,
Yeah.
have they themselves made a contribution? Because I find it really hard to take people seriously when they've not. Contaminated water is a major source of disease. I mean, let's dream a little bigger. Now that we've established the scale
Well,
of inequality of the US, let's dream
some
a
of
little
these
bigger.
people are also the same people who oppose putting chlorine in water.
Right. What could we do with 40% of this money? right? Give
Okay.
$10,000 to each. Oh, I mean, it is a
Again,
little bit repetitive. There are about 128 million households to give each. Yeah, what? But why? Why? Like, it's just it doesn't actually change the underlying structure
no.
of these people's earning power. As Americans debate how and when to open the economy after coronavirus, we're frequently presented with a seemingly impossible choice between risking millions of lives and sliding into a Great Depression through continued lockdown. This is a repugnant lie. The money to weather the storm while maintaining quarantine exists. It's just a matter of at the risk of sounding tedious. I mean, he does realize that these assets are going to have to be liquidated.
He doesn't. These people think that money is magic tokens.
Yeah, it's
You know,
crazy. What could we do with
money's just
80?
magic tokens, and no matter what happens, but they don't get that the money itself is not worth anything. They're very fond of the mantra, "You can't eat money." They're fond of that. It's like, oh, you know, these people, you can't eat your money. That's right, you can't. And these people forget that when they say, "Oh, just give everybody $10,000." Well, what use is it possibly going to be to them? You know, now that it's all plastic, you can't fucking even wipe your ass on it. The
Yeah,
money, it's, you know, it'd be like the Weimar Republic with people
yeah,
going around with wheelbarrows full of money
yeah, because
trying
the
to buy
money's
a loaf
based
of
on
bread.
trust. It's
Yeah,
based on trust and property rights, i.e., that someone's not
yeah.
just going to acquisition it at any point. So this action
Every
is that,
failed state has something. Well, of many things in common, but one of the things that they have in common in failed of all failed states is a complete disregard by the state for property rights.
right, exactly. And also, that's pretty much why countries are poor. I mean,
Yeah,
again, you know, we all know Singapore and Hong Kong were as poor as Africa was at one point,
yeah,
and in 30 years, they became rich because of property rights. Whereas a lot of those countries in Africa still don't respect property rights. There's countries there where it takes 36 months to open a business to get a license. And you never know if the cops are just going to come by and go, right, your new bar
yeah,
belongs to us now. So no one builds anything. No one
yeah.
builds anything when their property rights aren't secure.
the
This
only the
is,
only people who are able to be rich and maintain their position are those who bribe government officials
yeah,
in
which
order
means
to
you
keep their
probably have to
status.
be wealthy already in order. So
Yeah,
where's your social mobility there? It says
yeah.
these programs combined would completely transform our world. I'll say, by redistributing wealth, millions of lives would be saved. Billions of people would be rescued from poverty and disease. I love this line. By inconveniencing just 400 people. Oh, you know, it's like, yeah, these people, fuck him. They're just, you know, they're just, they don't count. But also, it's like, it's the idea that A, it's just an inconvenience, and B, that it would only affect those 400 people and there wouldn't be
Yeah.
like massive,
Well, that's
um,
supposed to be right. Once those 400
that,
people are gone, right, and they don't have any money anymore, they don't have any assets anymore. They're just another Joe like you and me because all their money's taken from them and redistributed. What then? Where next?
yeah, I mean, no one's going
Where
to
where do you
build.
go next for your money?
It says, and all of them would still be billionaires afterwards. So the idea is to strip all their money except for 1 billion. Is it really so radical to suggest that this is the right thing to do? Given the choice between millions of deaths, I'm telling you, I think it would be. I think if this was actually
Yeah,
done, far more people would die because it would cause
yeah.
such
Well,
chaos and
I think that's
anarchy,
demonstrable.
and slightly shrinking the fortunes of a few super rich people. How could anyone conclude that the death of millions is preferable?
Well, this
It's
is about it's
so
back to the you want people
patronizing.
to die argument. You know?
We cannot accept this level of equality any longer. Who is this we? I keep on saying to collectivists.
Yeah. We
So
are living.
it's just frustrating because, you know, Murray Rothbard basically once said, it's no sin to be ignorant of economics. After all, it's a very specialized field. However, it is um, unforgivable to loudly make to loudly advocate economic policies without a grounding in economics.
Well, what
And
do you do with somebody, though, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who apparently has a degree in economics?
well, I
Well,
mean, she's got a degree from the universities, which are largely beneficiaries of government funds.
yeah,
So it's not surprised that the universities um, are teaching Keynes and things like
yeah.
that, and or
Do you think they even introduce them to Austrian economics in any capacity? Do you think they even mention it?
they basically get a footnote. The thing is, the
Right.
way that economics is taught is it's a lot of statistics and econometrics right up to Mises's day. He presided over the move from economics from a field in which people wrote manifestos and tracts in as plain language as they could muster, to all this econometric statistics and what have you. So Mises is acknowledged for talking about the consumer, the importance of consumers in markets, and he's acknowledged for his theory of the business cycle, the Austrian theory of the business cycle, and he is um, acknowledged for being one of the last great liberal thinkers.
Yeah,
However, um, from what I hear is the, the normal thing is they just really get a footnote on the Austrians. But the thing is, some of the ideas of the Austrians basically filtered into mainstream economics and are
yeah,
actually accepted. What was so, while they as a school are not acknowledged, economics, the canon of economical thought, does accept a lot of ideas that were peculiar to the
yeah,
Austrian school at the turn of the 20th century and say up until the
yeah.
Second World War.
Unfortunately, I guess the Chicago school's a lot better known.
Yeah, much better known.
Yeah,
And obviously the differences in not in it's mostly about method.
yeah.
But the interesting thing is, um, I forget what I was going to say. You
Okay.
fill some dead air.
Well, where are we now? Because we've been chuntering on here for.
Well, I'm pressing the right button, and we're
Okay,
at like a quarter of a trillion. So we're going to chunter on a bit longer. Um,
okay. So about 250 trillion. We have to reach 296 trillion.
no,
Yeah, I mean we get it. You know,
2.96.
it's a fuck ton of money. Um, and if you think this is frightening, you want to start looking at government debt, and you want to start looking at what government spends and what it gets in return for that spending. Yeah, lost you, Antony. Mr. Sammeroff has gone. Um, Obviously, the fly has done for him. I don't know why he swallowed a fly, but I guess he'll die. So
I literally,
while
sorry, I
Antony's
literally,
gone,
I don't know if that will have recorded. I don't know if that will have recorded you while my headphones crashed. So
right,
you
well, it
might,
said it was flashing recording, so I just kept chuntering.
so continue your so start your chunter from the beginning.
What did you hear what I said? No.
No, because my headphones
Okay, I
ran
was
out of
just saying
battery.
Mr. Sammeroff has left the building. I don't know what, maybe the fly's done for him. I don't know why he swallowed the fly, but I guess he'll die. But you haven't died, so that's pretty good. You're back. I can't see you though.
Yeah, unfortunately, I had to remove my webcam so I could plug my headphones in. Um, so yeah, economics. I guess. Sorry, what were you chuntering on about?
I was just filling the air while you were gone. So I was hoping something else would come up on the screen that I could go in. But
Yeah.
I was going to start
Yeah.
complaining about the NHS, but I'll do that in a different show. I'll do that in the
Okay,
next one.
so it's quite we're I think that means I'm only actually a tenth of the way through scrolling across this turquoise
No, no,
block.
no.
But I don't know if there's any Easter eggs at the end of it. So what I'd like to say is that
Is there any
if
way you can speed it up?
no, unfortunately not.
Yeah, there is. There's a thing at the bottom. Do you see it?
Where?
At the bottom of the screen, there's a little square, little grey square. That's the scroll bar. You can scroll faster.
Oh, can I? Let's try that out. Let's see. I don't know. The thing is,
Yeah, there it is.
I don't know if we'll miss some Easter eggs by doing that. I guess he'll
Yeah,
probably
but there's
put
Easter egg. I don't want to be here like tomorrow afternoon.
exactly. So what happens if you scroll to the end? Nothing. That's all. Okay. Any parting words? Because I think this is going to turn out to be an hour and 10 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, parting words. Jeff Bezos, you're still a dick.
Right.
But the problem is once, it's like that thing, they came for the trade unionist, but I wasn't a trade unionist, so I said
Yeah,
nothing.
exactly.
They came
It's
for
more
Jeff
about
Bezos.
defending the
Yeah,
concept
yeah,
of private property. The thing is, libertarians are fond of saying, um, well, the problem is just the government giving handouts to these people, and we need to stop that. And I agree that the fundamental problem is the right of the government to hand out special privileges.
yeah,
However, I don't think we can give the financial elites, we can let them off the hook and say, well, don't hate the player, hate the game. Because when you're at that level of wealth and influence, you are essentially responsible for defining the rules of the game by your lobbying. So the thing is, it's the referee. They're actually, they're not just, you can't say don't hate the player, hate the game about Bill
yeah,
Gates because he got IP, because he actually went and defined the rules of the game. So I don't think that we should give rent
no,
seekers themselves a free pass.
no,
That's where I've moved. That's where my, because I was over to the side of sort of giving rent seekers a free pass and saying, well, the problem's just the government. I agree that the fundamental problem is the government, but
yeah,
at this point, the line between, when you've got that much influence over the government's policies, you're basically part of the state apparatus, and that's where my position has moved in the last 2 weeks.
yeah,
So, but the thing is, as you say, fundamentally, undermining the principle of private property is going to make things a lot worse. So you essentially, if you want to stop these abuses, you really need to target the government's ability to choose winners and losers. And unfortunately, the left are not going to do that because they want the government to pick winners and losers, just the winners that they choose.
yeah,
Any
yeah.
anything else?
Nope, I think I'm done here.
All right, good show. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Speak to you soon. Cool.